everybody, it's Henry Gilbert.
And I'm Hollander Cooper.
Of GamesRadar.com. And you know, the Game Boy original just turned 25 years old.
That's crazy. That's older than probably like 64% of the people watching this video right now.
I know, the fact makes me feel very old, but I have a lot of
you're
great...
pretty old.
All right. But I have a lot of great memories attached to the system, like because there were just so many awesome games on it. In fact, we compiled the list of the top 10 best Game Boy games.
Actually, on the website, GamesRadar.com, we have the top 50 Game Boy games, but I don't think our video guys have time to edit together a 50.
Yeah, let's take it easy on them. And really, let's just focus on the cream of the crop, the 10 best that were on the system. These are the ones, some of them are available to download on 3DS. Others, you might have to just buy the old thing to play them, but they're all worth your time.
Yes.
And let's start with number 10, Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins.
Yeah, so obviously a classic.
Oh yeah, this was the sequel to the Game Boy launch game Super Mario Land, but this was so much better than Super Mario Land. Like, it was so much more detailed, a richer experience. Like, the stages were much more in the style of the Super NES stages for Mario.
Yeah, by the time this game came out, they knew the system better, is all it came down to, and they were able to use that knowledge to make a much more complex game.
Yeah, it had lots of new power-ups in it too. It had his the bunny ears, which basically work like a Tanuki tail.
Yeah.
He had a fire feather because with the monochromatic design, you couldn't tell that he was red and could throw fireballs.
Now he's a lighter shade of weird green.
And also it introduced Wario to the world. And Wario basically became so popular, he was just a villain in this one and then just took over the Super Mario Land series from then on out. One of my favorite memories of it is they had a commercial that introduced us all to Wario, which instead of really showing any gameplay, it just had a cartoon of Wario's face, like zooming into the screen of like, "This is Wario, you will follow me, defeat Mario." Ooh, it was so awesome. Man. But yeah, that is the best Mario platformer on the Game Boy. Definitely. So number 9 is one that's very close to my heart, Mario Tennis.
Yeah, one of the first major Nintendo spin-off Mario sports games. And I know that sounds like I'm creating too small of a subsection, but there were like 150 games in there, so...
Yeah. This, what was impressive about this game is that it was a Game Boy Color game that came out like near the tail end of the Game Boy's lifespan, like into the N64 years. And it was developed by Camelot, who had, before starting the Mario sports games, they were an RPG developer.
Right.
Like, they made all the Shining games. And that kind of followed into this. So the gameplay is impressive because it plays basically the same as the N64 edition. I guess, a tennis game.
Yeah, they reached the peak of what you actually want from an arcadey tennis game like 20 years ago.
Oh yeah. And so they just shrunk that down, put it on the Game Boy, but it also had like a 15-hour RPG, except the battles were tennis games. But you leveled up, you gained XP, all that stuff. Like, it was a ton of fun. And what else to say about this? Oh yeah, it did connect to the N64 game. It was one of the very few non-Pokemon games to use that transfer pack thing that you could attach to the N64. But yeah, it's such a great tennis game. That one's available on the 3DS eShop. Definitely worth pulling.
Sure.
Hey, number 8, Shantae.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out here who probably have never even heard of Shantae. It's maybe one of the most well-respected platformers that no one has played.
Yeah, it was very obscure at its time, and then just got more and more forgotten. Though now Shantae has come back into consciousness just because WayForward, the guys who created her, have kept making new games in the series. They just had a pretty effective Kickstarter for it. But when it came out, it was one of the last Game Boy games of note, and it really pushed the system about as far as it could go. Like, it had such great character animations. It was, as colorful as you can get on a Game Boy Color, and the platforming was just a lot of fun. Like, it was made by WayForward, who just are really good at 2D games. Like, they worship classic 2D games, and this was basically them making their own NES game. Yeah,
and it wasn't done that far after anyway, so they ended up having, it was basically the most classic game. They've been almost emulating their own style since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this came out, I think, almost within the same year as the Game Boy Advance, so a lot of people missed it, but this was one of the best side-scrollers the system saw. All right, number 7, Dragon Warrior 3, aka Dragon Quest 3. Now this is like the highest rated RPG on here, and I say this from experience. I put over 100 hours into it myself.
Oh yeah, and then this was also in the classic era of Nintendo / other developers not knowing how to name things in America versus Japan, so I understand if you're a little confused.
Yeah, if it ever got re-released here, it would probably be under the Dragon Quest name.
Right.
But whatever it's called, Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior 3 was one of the most popular games ever in Japan. Like, sold a ton. Every time they re-released it, sold a ton. And it's easy to see why if you're an RPG fan, because it's just like, it just crystallizes what was great about 8-bit RPGs. Like, the turn-based battle systems were great. It had a very, like, it was a simple but actually kind of twisting story. And the job system, like, just pulled me in so much. Like, you could just leveling up in your jobs, wanting every character to master every job. It just let you specialize your team in a way that you couldn't do in previous Dragon Warrior games or other RPGs of its time. Like, it was so good. But it was one that some people missed on the NES, and when they repackaged it for the Game Boy, it was even better. Like, they added a ton of new quests. They added all these, like, weird gambling mini games, and it actually had a good translation for once. Like, the Dragon Warrior 3 is like this great lost 8-bit RPG that is awesome to pick up on the Game Boy. All right, number 6, Metal Gear Solid, aka Metal Gear Solid Ghost Babel. So it was one of those games, you know, where they call something like, oh, the initials are GB, or like how many DS games were called DS.
Dual Strike, Dust Shockers,
Deadly Silence.
Deadly Silence.
But anyway,
Double Strike.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. All right, so the Metal Gear Solid Ghost Babel. It was an alternate retelling of the Metal Gear games, Metal Gear Solid games. It basically took the Metal Gear Solid style of story and the Solid Snake character, but kept the gameplay more like the original Metal Gear games that were on the NES. So, you know, it was the top-down view, the sneaking was about the same, but it was just great how much Kojima was able to keep the feel when transferring it to the Game Boy. Like, you still had the codex, you still had specialized weapons, you still, again, had a story of a lot of spy intrigue and backstabbing and insane revelations, except now Snake's face was basically one pixel on the screen.
Yeah, it's almost like when you look back at the fact that there's like the 2D Zeldas and the 3D Zeldas, that managed to feel so interconnected. This was basically that, except with Metal Gear, except it was after we'd already seen how powerful and how great Metal Gear Solid could become.
Yeah, it was a great dramatic game. If you've always wanted to play the old Metal Gears but thought they'd be too dated, this is a nice bridge between old Metal Gear and current Metal Gear. Number 5, Kirby's Dream Land 2, the second Kirby game for the system. This one ranks a bit higher for me than the original Kirby Dream Land, and the main reason is he's got friends now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you remember, but he had the hamster, he had the owl, he had the blowfish, all these little buddies that would help him, and it really let Kirby differentiate himself even more than just what he could do from just sucking in dudes and changing his powers.
Yeah, and they managed to do that without making the game's turn to be about that. Like what happened with Sonic, once they started adding friends and buddies, it ended up just transforming into just a muddled, confusing mess. But here they were able to add just friends and new abilities without compromising the Kirby experience.
Yeah, exactly. It was still the same Kirby stuff you loved. You even fought a giant tree very early on. And I also...
Kirby loves fighting trees.
They're his mortal enemies.
He just can't stand living wood. He just doesn't like it much. Like couches or tables, he's fine with. Once that thing starts blowing air towards him, he feels threatened.
And I also love about that game that had one of my favorite intros in Kirby, where it was all super anime style, where like the characters' faces would just fly across the screen and like high detail by Game Boy standards. Anyway.
4 pixels.
All right, number 4, Donkey Kong, aka Donkey Kong 94, if you're a stickler for the Japanese name.
You are like the biggest supporter of this game anyone is going to meet.
I love this game. It was such a surprise for me. Just to get a personal anecdote real quick, that I bought it as a kid thinking it was just the arcade version of the game. Just the first 4 stages, and that's all I wanted. And then you beat the 4th stage, and then Donkey Kong just gets up and kidnaps Pauline again, and you chase him for 96 more stages.
It's incredible how much bigger this game was, and how they totally could have gotten away with just making it a port, but decided to make it a game that was, wow, I can't do math, 25 and a half times bigger?
I think that math checks out. Yeah,
give or take.
It was Miyamoto and his team showing off what they could do on such a small thing. They fit in so many Mario. It's like this weird like mixture of all these different Mario ideas. Like he can stand on people and throw them like he can in Mario 2. He can do the handstand into a bigger jump that he then would do later in Mario 64. And it even has a story point that connects Donkey Kong to Super Mario Brothers, which was very surprising to me. It was also great on the Super Game Boy. Unlike a lot of games, it didn't just recolor it. Like, it had special programming in there to give it specific colors and to give it like specialized borders that would make it look like the arcade machine even. It was really cool. Number 3, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX specifically. On this list, like we do with other lists, we wanted to have the best version of it that was on the system, and that's the DX version. So Link's Awakening was a big deal back when it first came out because it showed that you could fit a Zelda game onto a portable system.
Yeah, I mean, putting a Zelda game onto a console was a big deal when original Zelda came out because it was so unlike anything you had seen. So being able to transfer that to a handheld kind of was the proving point of handhelds in that time.
Yeah, that the smaller screen could take the massive overworld that a Zelda game needs. And this was also a really trippy Zelda game too. Like, it still had the dungeons and stuff that is so much fun, but it also was this weird dream world that Link was trapped in and was seeing all these familiar faces that weren't really the people he knew, but they looked just like him.
Nintendo really liked doing that kind of weird dream thing. Whenever they thought of an idea that was kind of like what they were doing, but different enough, they were like, it's just a dream, whatever, it's cool.
Oh, it's a dream. It's not real like the other games.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, but it was still great. And when they put it to the DX version that was re-released with the Game Boy Color, like, they added a couple more levels, and there was also a Game Boy camera integration, which not many people used, or the Game Boy printer integration.
There's like 2 people out there that are like, I used it, I printed stuff.
But they recolored it in a great way. It was not just like a quick pass over it. Like, it looks really good. Just seeing the giant egg on the title screen with its like pink polka dots is just great. Number 2, what a lot of people might have put at number 1, Tetris.
Yes, I mean, I feel like if we took the combined time that everybody in the world put into Game Boy Tetris, you'd probably have, what, 1 trillion hours of gameplay? I mean, until every batter, like, that probably ruined millions of years worth of just productivity.
Landfills and landfills of batteries just filled up from that thing. We could have solved world hunger.
We single-handedly caused global warming, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that is the power of Tetris specifically, and it was never bigger than on the Game Boy. Like, this was packed in with the Game Boy in the US. It sold the system. Like, as good as Super Mario Land was at the time, Tetris sold the system, and it got kids and adults just playing it endlessly.
And also, it's hard to think back to a time where handheld systems had countless battery life, pretty much. But if you were ever on like any flight or any long trip, it was amazing because it was like either a book or playing a ton of Tetris because the battery on that thing was crazy long.
Yeah, and the music would just get stuck in your head forever. Like, it was so good. The only downside to this one now is just that it is slightly dated in its interface compared to, say, Tetris 3D or later editions of it that focus more on like battles and stuff. That you could,
the DS Tetris is probably the best Tetris existence.
Yeah, Tetris DS is the best, I would say. But this is a close runner-up, and it gives us so many feels just thinking about it.
So many.
Okay, and the number 1 Game Boy game of all time is Pokemon Red, Blue, and I guess you could throw yellow in there too.
Might as well.
Too. And green, which was the Japan-only version.
Yes.
But yeah, Pokemon Red and Blue.
This was I mean, obviously people were calling it a fad at the time because anything that gets this big, this fast, can't possibly be popular forever, and yet here we stand with it still being as big as ever. But it was huge. Everyone you know had a copy and played it all the time.
Yeah, it was crazy to me it's crazy that the Game Boy had like 8 years basically of existence before Pokemon even came out. It seemed to be breathing its last breath, and then here comes this monster collecting RPG that is like made to work best portably. It is a portable game, and it was just so perfect on the Game Boy, just trading the trading, the
battling,
the battling, all that stuff. Like,
and like, even though it was clumsy and you had to use those link cables and everything, they were still so confident in the game's ability, enough so to be like, well, we want to push you to collect all of them, but we're going to make certain Pokemon that you have to trade back and forth, and no one minded because you wanted to do that. They like. You even saw them pretty much going through the cord on the interface. They put so much effort into making sure that you felt like you were actually holding Pocket Monsters in that Game Boy. They took full advantage of the handheld.
Yeah. Game Freak really, really understood the Game Boy and what was great about it, and expressed it to its fullest. The Gold and Silver editions were really great too, but it's hard to not love the original 151
yeah,
just
and
a little bit more.
And though there are flaws with it, especially things like quality of life things that were added in future games, there were never any huge problem. Like going back to that one, it's a little slower, but it still holds up so well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the whole world was just playing it for Twitch. Like that shows you how dedicated people can still be to
Praise
Red and
Helix.
Blue.
That's right.
So that is why it is our #1 Game Boy game of all time. If you want to see numbers 50 through 11, and I'm sure you do, go to the page on GamesRadar.com for best Game Boy games. There's a link in the description down here if you're watching on YouTube. Go check them all out. All 50 are worth playing. And until next time, Game Boy forever.
That's your sign off?
Yeah.